On today's Let's Talk Climate episode, we'll cover Vote Kids, climate change, and the 2020 election with our fantastic guests. Dr. Aparna Bole, Chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council on Environmental Health. Hi, Aparna. And Diana Fernández, Youth Leader with the National Children's Campaign. Hi, Diana.
Hi.
And Sophia Kianni, Founder and Executive Director of Climate Cardinals. Welcome, Sophia.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks so much for being here. We are excited to jump into this timely conversation with the three of you. By way of introduction, I was hoping you could each let us know about a time you successfully connected the dots on climate change, kids, and health with someone else, whether it was family, peers, or policymakers. Sophia, why don't we start with you?
I think that once I was appointed to the UN's Youth Advisory Group on climate change, it really established credibility that even the UN, like such a widely known international entity, realized how crucial it is to have young people involved in decision making and dialogue. And I really do think that when I was talking to like my friends and other climate activists about it, it really made us realize that yes, youth need to be in all these decision making processes because climate change is going to disproportionately affect our generation in a way that hasn't been seen before. And that definitely translates into elections as well, just because we need to be voting for climate friendly like candidates if we actually want to see progress being made on the climate crisis.
Aparna, you want to pick it up from there?
Absolutely. Thank you. Couldn't agree more about the youth voice, which is why I'm so excited to be here with my fellow panelists. I'm going to offer two quick examples. One is that here in Ohio, we've had some recent dialogue around clean energy standards and renewable efficiency standards as a matter of policy. And I've noticed that speaking with policymakers, really irrespective of their party affiliation, from the standpoint of a health professional, is really received in a different kind of way than, say, an environmentalist or someone who's perceived as an industry representative. I really feel that the sort of connecting energy policy with health outcomes and describing energy policy as a public health issue has really cut across a lot of that political noise in an effective way locally. One other brief example is I have an opportunity as a pediatrician to work with a number of grassroots advocates for health equity in our community. And some of the hot button pediatric public health equity issues here, just like in many cities, includes infant mortality, the racial disparities between birth outcomes in our city. Another example might be school readiness. How do we ensure that kids have an equitable opportunity to healthy early childhood development? And I feel like it's been, really kind of a game changer to be able to infuse language about environmental justice, clean air, and climate change into those conversations so that my partners who come from that perspective of being grassroots community health equity advocates are now also using language about our right to clean air and how environmental justice plays into some of those health disparities. So I think those are two sort of recent examples I would highlight.
Yeah, and Diana.
Thanks, Rebecca. To tell you the truth, I am constantly talking about climate change at home, at school, everywhere. I'm kind of known for it at this point, but I really do love talking to people about it, and I love debating and even disagreeing. But I feel as though there is definitely a lack of access to information or just a lack of understanding in general about the climate crisis when it comes to minority or immigrant communities like mine. And by that, I mean that when my parents lived in Cuba, the climate wasn't really the first thing on their mind. And that way of thinking somewhat translated into their life in America. And I feel as though they aren't as passionate about it as I am. But that being said, my parents, do support me and the work I do. And most of the time they are interested in having conversations about it with me. So there are definitely a few occasions where I felt like they finally understood where I was coming from. And I was finally able to, as you said, connect the dots with them on climate change and kids and health. And I wish I could have that experience with everyone I talk to, but it would really be remiss of me not to mention that with all that I just said, there's definitely a clear lack of access to information because of the language that they speak, because English isn't their native language. But luckily for us, one of our very own panelists, Sophia Kianni, has an organization to address those specific problems. But up until recently, I feel as though that hasn't been something that was talked about enough. And I wish I could have that experience of connecting the dots with everyone that I talk to and everyone in my family.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing from all of you is that it's making climate change less of an abstract issue. I think when we started talking about, this issue was on the table decades ago. But, even 10, 15 years ago, it was still talked about as something that was happening in the future. Maybe polar bears were going to get hurt. And it's really been our role to help humanize the issue. And nothing does that better than talking about impacts to your health and impacts to kids. And so appreciate you bringing those examples forward as we continue to have these critical conversations with folks. And so, Diane, I'm going to stick with you for just a minute to talk about an equitable climate future, and just want to get your take on what does an equitable climate future look like for you? The three of you are on the call today. You're the ones making change. What does that change look like? Diana, why don't you get us started?
Well, I think it's important to mention that climate change is definitely an issue that we have to address through an intersectional lens. And when discussing climate justice, we must also discuss racial justice or migrant justice and social equity in general. And with that in mind, an equitable climate future, for me at least, would be one where minorities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color would be on an equal playing field compared to everyone else, especially when it comes to climate. And as youth striving for change, we definitely need to understand that climate justice is intrinsically connected to social justice, and we need to do our best to put those communities that are most heavily impacted, disproportionately at least, by the environment on the front lines.
Yeah, Sophia, want to pick up?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that it'll be crucial for us to have a just transition that takes into mind everyone who is being affected by the climate crisis, because obviously in our pursuit of switching over to renewable energy, we can't just leave people cold turkey to lose their jobs in like sectors such as coal and gas. We really need to be making sure that we're putting money towards retraining these workers and giving them new job opportunities. I do think that it makes a lot of sense to tie our COVID recovery to also having an opportunity to build back greener and better, and really letting people know that we can build a more just society while still wanting to be equitable and wanting to be climate friendly, and then still being able to preserve our economy and actually giving people more job opportunities.
I agree, and I'll just endeavor to add to the great points that have already been made. To me, an equitable climate future needs to be founded on centering health and health equity in solutions. It means no more sort of externalizing risk, socializing risk, and privatizing profit. It means no longer having health harms of environmental harm being borne disproportionately by marginalized populations to the benefit of a few. I completely agree with everything that Sophia just said about the concept of just transition, and I would add that it means that frontline communities are leading the way in designing solutions, that the table that we set for designing solutions has to include partnership and co-leadership with frontline communities. That means workers, it means people impacted by environmental justice, and it also means youth. So that what we have to look forward to is a more equitable economy, but also equity in terms of environmental justice.
And we've started talking about ecoAmerica. We've had conversations about actually correcting past injustices as well, like actively working towards correcting past injustices in the same way that we have to actively not just stop our carbon emissions, but remove carbon that we've historically emitted. And so there are these parallels. And I want to pick up on that because we actually did get a question from Michelle from Durham, North Carolina, asked as part of her registration actually for today. How do you see environmental justice and climate justice related to each other and to health? And so you've already started to touch on these important topics, but just wanting to dig a little deeper on the intersections there. Aparna, why don't you start?
Sure. I'm really glad to hear this question, especially at this moment in time, as we are continuing to grapple with a respiratory pandemic, while we are grappling with the struggle for racial justice, and then also in this kind of critical moment, this crucible moment around climate action. I don't think there's a better time to be asking that question, because I've really learned to think about and describe these issues as not like three separate big problems we're trying to solve, but really different ways of describing the same problem. When we think about the inequities that are being highlighted by the COVID pandemic, not only in terms of health outcomes, but also in terms of economic disparities being exacerbated during this time. And then you think about what climate justice really means, sort of in parallel. We talk about inequitable health harms of climate change, but also this notion that we sort of referred to just now, that those who are harmed the most by the health effects of climate change aren't the ones who are profiting from the activity that's causing it, right? And so if we think about a system that the system whose vulnerabilities has been so, sort of tragically underscored by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a system that's based on extraction, exploitation, consumption, and disposal. It's vulnerable. We're struggling in this moment of pandemic. So when we think about what a new normal looks like, when, that notion of extraction, consumption, disposal, exploitation, consumption, disposal, you have this dynamic where when people, certain groups of people are disposable or expendable, that's the mindset that causes our planet to be expendable too, because we are externalizing risk for the benefit of a few. So to me, we're sort of talking about describing solutions to the same problem in addressing this trifecta of crises at the same time, creating a new normal that is more just and sustainable and regenerative. It addresses these COVID-related inequities. It addresses our struggle for racial justice. It addresses exactly what we mean by climate justice. So I just think there's no better time to be talking about that critical question right now.
Yeah, that answer is gonna sit with me for a while, because the term we've used on the Let's Talk Climate webcast before that I first heard from Vernice Miller-Travis is syndemic, and that we are facing a syndemic, and it's one word to really try to describe the overlapping injustices that result in these health inequities, that we've been seeing for a long time, that COVID-19 has exposed, but at the root of it, it means that there's tremendous opportunity for equitable solutions, and the way, just some of the your succinct framing is really going to, I think, help folks wrap their heads around what can at times feel like a very daunting problem. So I want to pick it up from there, Sophia.
Definitely. I mean, most recently, over the past few months, I've been working with the American Lung Association, just because I realized that there are distinct parallels between the fact that like minority communities of colors are really being disproportionately affected by air pollution and just environmental hazards. And it really brings me back to when I first began to get involved in the climate movement, which was when I took a trip to Iran, which is my parents' home country. And I was just so struck by how horrible the pollution was. And I actually went online and I learned more, like babies are dying because air pollution is so bad. 1,500 people were hospitalized over a period of just 24 hours because of air pollution. It's horrifying. And what's even more horrifying is that these people don't even have access to information that tells them what's happening to their communities, which is like part of the reason why I started Climate Cardinals, just because when I was talking to my relatives about these issues, I realized that this information just was not easily accessible to them. There's barely any climate information available in Farsi, which is their native language. And so I think a lot of this is about education and just making these communities aware of what is happening to them so that they can speak out and become advocates and really feel empowered. Because so much of this is that I don't think it's fair to have conversations without those frontline communities that are being directly affected, because they're the ones who can tell us, well, what's going on in their communities and how can we really support them directly.
Agreed. Diana?
Can you hear me? Because I think my internet connection is a little bit unstable. But if you can hear me, well, I think that there's really no question that climate justice is related to health. And both Sophia and Aparna brought up some really good points relating to how air pollution affects people, really, and how those issues have been exposed by the COVID pandemic. I mean, in simpler terms, global warming and warmer temperatures can worsen air quality, which will in turn impact people's health. And because of that, we see 4.6 million deaths every single year due to air pollution causes. And that's not really the only problem, is it? Like that's I guess the climate portion of it is, but then there's also the social justice part of it, which is something that I like to focus on. Out of all those people that are affected greatly each year, there are people that are impacted more. The POC communities, the Black and Latino communities, and Indigenous communities. They're the ones that live in the neighborhoods that are near these factories that emit these harmful fumes. They're the ones that are hospitalized each year because of these problems. And they're the ones that we need to put our efforts out to make sure that we can address these communities the most. And I feel as though now, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, I've been seeing it in my own neighborhood. I mean, I've never thought of my neighborhood as one that was as impacted by air pollution as other communities across the country, but it's also one that's 94% Hispanic. And because of that, we are also the county that was most affected by COVID-19 in the state of Florida, which is pretty insane for me to think about and to wrap my mind around. And as someone who lives in a family of essential workers, and who my dad and I have both contracted COVID-19, I've seen firsthand just how terrible it is for people to experience this every single day because of other health causes. And so when talking about climate justice and environmental justice, I ask everyone to please put in their minds these communities that are most impacted, not just by COVID-19, but for years they have been most impacted.
Yeah, wow. Wow. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing and telling your own personal story, because I think that also we talk a lot about the importance of storytelling in getting the message across and helping people understand. And so, Sophia, what do you say to folks looking to get involved in general in the climate movement? And since we're focusing, on youth, does your advice to people differ depending on what age they are? So if you're talking to maybe a grandparent, is it different than what you say, to someone middle-aged or someone younger? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
To a certain extent, to be honest, no, because I really do think the first step of just getting involved is putting yourself out there and reaching out to people that you want to work with. Or at least that's how I started getting really deeply involved in the climate movement. I started DMing people on Instagram, like reaching out to them on Twitter, LinkedIn, in the most random ways, just telling them how much I believed in their work and how I believed that I could add value. And I think that anyone can do that, really. It's a matter of taking initiative and really wanting to talk about your story and owning your narrative and talking about how you can add value and support the work that people are already doing.
Yeah, that actually made me think of a quote I was reading this morning. All We Can Save. I don't know if, but it's an anthology of essays edited by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Catherine Wilkinson. It's all women leaders in the climate movement. And I was reading Shea Batista's essay this morning, and she ends with, "It's time to change our mindset toward implementing solutions. A vibrant, fair, and regenerative future is possible. Not when thousands of people do climate justice activism perfectly, but when millions of people do the best they can." And so your answer really made me think about that. And I know you're both, youth leaders. And so it sounds like everybody listening, do what you can when you can, and bring 10 of your friends along with you. I think that's really powerful advice. And so, I want to shift a little bit to talking about the election, which is coming up in a few days. And we are ecoAmerica's a 501c3, so we're going to keep it education and topic oriented. But Aparna, I was wondering from you, how are pediatricians raising their voices on climate and health this election season, and what kind of support do they still need in the next couple of days?
Thanks for asking that. Yeah, I can't believe that we're at the end of October already. I'm really incredibly proud of how quickly the movement around climate action has grown among my fellow pediatricians, because I think we really are on the front lines of witnessing how our patients are impacted every single day. So a couple of examples I'll highlight of some of our recent activities. The American Academy of Pediatrics has a Vote Kids toolkit that describes sort of key child health issues for those interested in understanding what is at stake in terms of child health in an election year. And one of our top issues this year that's outlined under sort of key, it's called Key Child Health Issues, is climate change and clean air. And it's really framed around health equity and climate justice, which I really appreciate. So there's a really nice summary of issues related to child health and climate change that are really relevant this election year. We also have in all of our American Academy of Pediatrics chapters, there are 59 local and state chapters, we have at least one, if not more, self-identified pediatrician climate advocates who are really like in it, committed completely to advocating around climate change and child health in their state and collectively beyond. So we really are attempting to leverage our voices around child health and climate change in this critical election year to make it clear that this is a pediatric public health issue that pediatricians are concerned about. And you asked about support. One of the things that I would love to strengthen in our advocacy is to more effectively partner with our patients, with youth who I think give us all so much inspiration and leadership in the climate movement, like Sophia and Diana and their colleagues around the country. I think that, there are pediatricians who are reaching out to our patients, reaching out to youth leaders in our communities. And I really think it's a natural alliance and partnership to lift up our voices together. And I would love to see more of that and to learn more about how to do that better.
And I'm actually gonna pick up on that because one of our questions, Lori from Montana asks actually specifically to the youth. So Sophia and Diana, what can we, the non-youth, do to help you the most? So how would you answer that question? Either one of you can start, just jump in.
Sure. So I think that it's really important now more than ever to remind adults to uplift and amplify youth voices, whether it's their own kids or their loved ones or really anyone that they know. I feel as though right now the issues that we're tackling are mostly issues that have been youth-led, like right now at least. And if the most important that we can all do, youth and adults, is listen to each other. Aparna said something about uplifting our voices together, and I think that's really important. I think that all we can really do is listen. We can listen to each other, and we can work together to commit to a more equitable future.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that it's really important to be uplifting youth voices, to be platforming us the same way that this is currently platforming us, just giving us opportunities to speak to people about our experiences. And also, I do think to a certain extent, it's really important to give youth opportunities and funding. It's definitely really hard. I have personal experience. I started a youth-led nonprofit, and getting funding is really hard. And so it's important for people to realize that, yes, while you should be supporting big adult-led organizations like Greenpeace that are very well known, it also means a lot just to be supporting youth, especially in your communities who are doing grassroots organizing with your support, whether that be giving them monetary support or even just giving them opportunities to tell their stories. It really does go a long way in furthering our impact.
And I would be remiss then if I did not mention the American Climate Leadership Awards, that ecoAmerica is, our call for applications is out, our call for nominations is out. And so I would encourage actually everyone on this call to apply. But if you know other youth leaders who are doing great work, we do have recognition, both cash and support for folks doing great work. So please, I think we're getting that information in the chat box now, but nominations are actually due November 2nd. So that's just coming up, that's around the corner. So, and applications are due by December 15th. So agreed that funding is always an issue. And so appreciate you especially mentioning the importance of funding youth movements and how much of a difference that can make in our capacity and ability to make a difference. And so switching back a little bit to the election, Diana, as someone who cannot vote yet, what is your message to folks who say they will not vote this year?
Well, I am wearing my voting shirt. So I obviously do think that voting is very important. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Not voting really would be doing a disservice to everyone who came before you, like your ancestors, or those who aren't allowed to vote, your kids, future kids. Simply put, I feel really that it would be anti-democratic. And I use like these strong um, words because I feel as though voting is one of the most important things you can do to get your voice heard. For me, especially, my parents came to the US from a country, from Cuba, a country ruled by an oppressive dictatorship. And they came to this country in search of freedom, political freedom, and freedom to express their views. So after everything they went through, to be able to have the privilege of living in a democracy and obtaining citizenship, I really could not imagine a world where they would decide not to vote. And because of that, I carry those values with me. And I think that voting is very, very important. And the last thing I'd like to mention is I've been like having these conversations a lot lately on why I think voting is important and why I think voting is one of the ways that you can get your voice heard. But recently I saw a post by one of my friends who is a DACA recipient and who isn't allowed to vote because of her citizenship status. And she reminded me that voting isn't the only way to get your voice heard. And I understand that there are people out there who aren't able to vote. And that's why I just like to remind everyone that of course it's not the only way to get your voice heard, but it's damn sure a very one. And there are a ton of people out there who wish that they could vote in this election season and everyone yet to come. So I encourage all of you to show up for this election and vote for those who aren't able to.
Could I add something really briefly? I couldn't agree more. I also want to acknowledge that we know that there are some communities where access to voting, there are barriers to access to voting. We've seen in the news about limited polling locations, inequitable access to polling locations or drop-off locations. It's certainly something we've been battling in my state in Ohio, all of which is to say it's still worth it. It's worth it to do what it takes to figure out the rules in your state, to figure out your polling location, to figure out the hours, come up with a plan if you haven't already. So I concur, but I also just want to comment that I think that part of our fight in climate action and climate justice needs to include fighting for a more just and equitable access to voting and access to democracy. I'm really proud that the climate movement in many ways has really embraced sort of this, this fight for democracy and to improve our democracy. I think it's incredibly important. And, I think it should have happened long ago. So.
Yeah, I could not agree more about making the democratic process more democratic, and of course, small d Democrat. But when I worked in Maryland doing specific policy work, I was a paid lobbyist, was my full-time job. I could hang out in the state capitol all day. I had my snacks. There was Wi-Fi. I was good to go. But for people who we were asking to come and give up a day of work to come and testify on a bill, and remember, they're only given 3 minutes. They might have to spend all day just to testify for 3 minutes. That's a day of wages. That's a day away from their kids. It's mileage to get to the state capitol. It's quite a bit of a hurdle for folks to have their voice heard, at least in this one example of, during the democratic process, or, when state departments hold public hearings in the middle of the day. We really do have to work on ways to open up the process. And I think in particular, COVID, has been it's been this other silver lining where they've actually had to take hearings online, in a way that maybe they didn't before, or accept PDF testimony and things. So it's interesting to think about some of the changes that we're making now that we may want to keep moving forward to make the process more accessible to all, to make sure that we're centering voices who have been systematically excluded from the process before. And so thank you, Aparna, for mentioning specifically that opportunity. And then Sophia, I didn't, everybody else weighed in. What did you tell folks who are saying they're not, they're just going to sit this one out this year?
Well, the way I think about it in terms of voter suppression, like if your vote didn't matter, then why are people trying so hard to take it away? And the reason is because your vote really does matter, and every vote has such an enormous impact on shaping the future of our country and of our democracy. And I mean, I respect everyone's decision, but I would strongly urge people to vote and at least look at the impact that your vote can have. I strongly doubt that people just are so apathetic towards the issues, the horrible hot button issues that are currently affecting our country, that they don't think that voting will make a difference. Voting will absolutely make a difference. And I think a lot of this, again, ties back to that issue of education. Just making sure that people are aware of what issues are on the docket. Like, how will this person's like confirmation, if they become our president, if they become our Supreme Court justice, how is that going to face, like, really change the future of our society? And when you educate people, instead of just like forcing them and saying you need to vote, we need to back up these assertions and we need to tell them why. Why do we want you to vote? We want you to vote because we care about climate change, we care about immigration, we care about criminal justice reform. And so if you care about these things too, then you should also want to vote. And it's not, I know, and it is hard to go vote sometimes. There are so many barriers, especially because of the way that our system is set up. But I think that part of being able to vote is trying to make the system better and trying to get rid of these barriers that currently are impeding people from being able to vote.
And I wanted to ask, there are some questions coming in about how do you help more locally, so like on the state level, if there's some opposition to climate solutions, or maybe some states see the issues as not in their purview, whether that's a specific health profession or a state department, executive level department. Maybe they're like, oh, climate change, that's somebody else's issue, not my issue. So just wondering, and that happens, we see sometimes more often on the state and local level. So what state and local level issues are you engaging in, and opportunities, and how would you answer that person's question about addressing climate change on a more local issue, on a more local level? And Aparna, I saw you start to unmute, so go ahead.
Yes, thank you. It's such a good question, and I think gets to the heart of one like really important aspect of effective climate advocacy is really keeping it local. And you mentioned this sort of notion that still kind of hangs around about polar bears in another time and place, another species, another time, another place. Well, the antidote to that is to focus on, our species, our neighbors in our time, in our place, right in our backyard. And I'll tell you, I think no matter what state or locality you're in, the health of children is something that everyone cares about. Pediatric health, children's health is not a partisan issue. It's not geographically specific. Everyone cares about the health of children in their community, in their state, making sure that their state remains a healthy place for children and families now and into the future. So first of all, I think that framing is important no matter where we are. There's also some great information that can be accessed, like in the National Climate Assessment, about local impacts of climate change, so that those of us who may not already be deep in the trenches to really educate ourselves about impacts that are already occurring in our community. When I talk about climate change in Ohio, I really focus on issues that are already affecting the health of my patients in Northern Ohio, whether it's air quality, more extreme and severe heat waves, more extreme precipitation events, toxic algae threatening drinking water in Lake Erie. I mean, these are all things that are very relatable. They're affecting our patients, our kids right now. And I think that really resonates with local policymakers. In Ohio, another sort of angle that's important in the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes that I like to focus on is the fact that investment in clean energy has been studied regionally in terms of its return on investment. And there is no place that has a better looking return on investment in terms of health and economy than the upper Midwest and Great Lakes states. A lot of people care about that issue. I grew up on the West Coast and lived on the East Coast for a number of years before moving to Ohio. And I think I have experienced this idea that, that somehow climate change is more of a focus on the coasts or something. And it's not, it is a hyper local issue wherever you are. And I think being able to really talk about those local issues and ground the information in health, especially children's health, really cuts across a lot of the noise at a local and state level. An example of how that's working here in Ohio, to answer your question, is we've had sort of an ongoing policy debate here in Ohio related to our renewable energy standards, energy efficiency standards, and sort of provisions around new renewable energy projects, as well as some other issues related to bailing out power plants. It's sort of been this ongoing issue here in Ohio. And as I mentioned before, having health professionals describe this issue as a public health issue, not just an energy issue or an industry issue or a taxpayer or a consumer, it's a health issue. And not only that, it's especially a child health issue, because nobody is more impacted than our children. I think that message is received by people on every side of the political aisle in a way that really is grounded in concern for our children, because I think that's something that we all have in common.
Yeah, Sophia or Diana, local impacts and the ways that you're getting involved locally.
I think there are so many different ways to get involved locally. I think definitely like Fridays for Future is one that like I can think of that definitely has branches all over the United States, and it's really easy to get involved in like local climate strikes. The only problem I would say is that with COVID, I think local like grassroots organizing has definitely been like halted just because of like public safety like hazards. And so I would actually urge people, like especially during this time, to look at like online activism. Like for instance, everything that Climate Cardinals is doing right now is all online. All of our volunteers go online and they translate climate information, and then we disseminate it using like the power of social media. But then post-COVID, I definitely think that there are so many grassroots organizing opportunities available with local climate organizations who are always in need of support and funding. But right now, I like, at least I personally have been doing a lot of my activism online just because I don't want to like risk my parents' safety or my own safety by catching COVID.
Yep, Diana, go ahead.
Yeah, so I do think it's a great question. I think Aparna really hit the nail on the head with this one by answering it. I agree with a lot of the points that she brought up, especially the fact that you could really connect these local issues to what people in your community think is most important. So in my case, this would be like, since I live in a community that's 94% Hispanic, I really wish that like there would be more opportunities, specifically in my city, to educate the community on how their status as a minority and really their immigration status has to do with issues as big as climate change. Unfortunately, there aren't, I mean, at least when I was growing up, like I never really noticed a lot of local initiatives in my city, mostly because of the language barriers. But fortunately for me, as Sophia mentioned, there is so much access to online activism right now, and it's something that a lot more people should get involved in. It's so easy to join any chapter of a grassroots organization or work with and support the efforts of nonprofit organizations that really fight for the causes that you believe in. I was actually really shocked to see how easy it was, for me to join National Children's Campaign or 0 Hour with just online applications. And now the work that I'm doing with these organizations, I think is really valuable and important to me. With National Children's Campaign, I was able to take part in this joint campaign with 0 Hour called Vote for Our Future, where we were able to educate so many youth voters in the Midwest actually about the importance of climate change and voting. And I really wouldn't have got involved in such meaningful work if I wouldn't have put myself out there and, research, connected with people, as Sophia mentioned earlier, actually. So I do think that it is so easy for anyone who cares about their community and who cares about these local issues to get involved in any way that they see fit.
And you and Sophia have both talked about the way that you started to get involved, which was just putting yourself out there a little bit, right? Start talking about this. And then you find that so many people around you are actually interested. We are featuring, October is Children's Health Month. And we, through a partnership with the American Academy of Pediatrics, we're able to feature a lot of pediatric leadership on climate solutions on including a blog from Aparna. And it's on the Climate for Health website. And in one of them, it was the same story. I just started talking to other pediatricians, and it turns out we were all interested. And so we really, I want to echo, what's being said here, and that start that conversation with folks, and you're going to find, there's going to be like, jump and someone will catch you. Right. So probably, more metaphorically now than ever, given COVID, but same, the sentiment is still true. I want to, we had a great question come in, and it's primarily for Sophia and Diana, but curious, do you see a lot of climate change denial among your peers, or do you encounter this more in your interactions with adults? Sophia, why don't you start?
I would say I definitely don't encounter it as much among my peers, just because I think that young people, like, our education system has gotten better to an extent where I do think a lot of us learn about climate change in school. Whereas I think the statistic is that 40% of the adults in the world have never learned about climate change, which makes more sense when I do talk to like my parents' friends and other like older people who just flat out don't believe in climate change, deny its existence, and are completely immune to any statistics or facts that I throw at them. And I think part of that also has to go to like approaches, where like I always get asked like, oh, what do you do about climate deniers? Like, how do you try to like persuade them to change their mind? And my answer, honestly, a lot of the time is that I don't, because I've realized that there's so much more like energy that goes into persuading someone who just will never be persuaded and doesn't want to be persuaded. Whereas I really have found my biggest impact is with working with people who believe in climate change but are kind of apathetic towards the issue. They haven't taken the next step of getting involved in organizations, donating, like voting for a climate friendly candidate, like really understanding and drawing the connection between climate justice and environmental racism. And so those are the types of people that I really want to engage in conversations, because they already have this fundamental baseline like understanding of science and belief in science. And so from there, it's much easier to engage them in subsequent conversations that are actually substantive.
Yeah, Diana, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think I have two important points, because when it comes to climate deniers, I don't run into like a ton of people who just flat out like tell me that climate change isn't real. I mean, it doesn't really happen, at least with the people I talk to. I'm sure that there are people out there who do actually believe that. But as Sophia said, there are definitely a ton of people who are sort of apathetic to the issue of climate change and who don't really care enough to research it or to learn about it, educate themselves, and form an opinion on it. And I do spend a lot of time like talking with those people and trying to educate them on like these issues for them to later form their own opinion on it. And when I say these people, I literally mean people as close to me as my parents. Like, there are a ton of people who they don't necessarily deny climate change, but it's not the first issue on their mind. And by educating them and like informing them on the issues that you care about the most, you can really play an impact in getting them to be more involved. But really, my second point is that there are people out there that do deny climate change. And a lot of the reasons behind that is because they sort of mimic what the people around them believe and what their parents believe. So, I mean, recently, climate change has become sort of a partisan issue. I don't agree with it. I think that climate change is climate change, and there is nothing Democratic or Republican about it. You really shouldn't be like putting it into one side and like in this little box. I think that it's something that affects us all, and because of that, we should all work together tackle it. But since it's become sort of a partisan issue, then you see people in specific areas with specific political views just flat out not want to get involved with it and not want to learn more about it because of their political beliefs, or because that they truly think that prevents them from from caring about it. And I have run into these situations. I have run into situations where people don't want to support me or my work or hear what I have to say because they're mimicking that of their parents or their family members. But one thing that I do slightly disagree with you on, Sophia, is that it's easy to waste your time talking to these people because half the time they won't change their mind. But I do try to put in some effort because I have gotten some pretty good feedback. Like on my social media, I try my best not to just, go straight to it and like tell them vote for this person or care about this issue. I try and educate about issues that I care about. And I have heard some people say that all my life I've done exactly what my parents told me to think and done what they believe in. But once I started educating myself and learning more about things firsthand, I changed my opinions. I changed my political views. I care more about this. I care more about that. And I mean, that's truly what makes me happiest. Like for people to really take initiative and educate themselves and form their own opinion. That's truly what matters the most. And that's what I like to put most of my effort in.
Yeah. Wow. And so I want to talk a little bit about the way climate change is impacting our mental health, which is thankfully, again, sort of COVID-19 has normalized a conversation around mental health because more and more people are feeling anxious all the time and in different ways. And, climate change is impacting our health in various ways. How do you face these challenges and keep up your endurance? That's, another thing is we all are, are making this our life's work. We're keeping this, we have to be in this for a long time. So how are you, sort of addressing the issue of climate change and mental health for others, and how are you addressing it for yourself? Sophia, why don't you start?
I think on a personal level, it's definitely really easy to get overwhelmed by all this work that we're doing, feeling like the weight of the world is on our shoulders. And so I definitely do think it's important for me and for other climate activists to really prioritize self-care. Like I always do try and I'm not sure where my squishy cheese is right now, but I keep this squishy cheese next to my desk and I always play with it as a stress ball whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed by the amount of work I have. Yeah, exactly. I also have a diffuser in the corner of my room that fills my room with lavender essential oils. And I really do think small little things like this can have such a nice impact on our mood, or at least for me it has. And then I think that more generally, I think we should be aware of the fact that mental health and the climate crisis are so interlinked. It really does have such a damper on people's mental well-being, knowing that this crisis is happening and that people aren't doing anything about it. And so we should all be taking care of each other, and also realizing that activist burnout is a really real thing, and we need to be making sure that we're taking care of our community.
Yeah, Diana, you want to pick it up?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the topic of mental health has always been something that's been sort of hard for me to talk about, just because, I mean, this might probably just be the case for a lot of people, but when you're, excuse me, when your family or culture doesn't really prioritize mental health as something that is valid, it does have an impact on you. And so I went my whole life thinking that it was just something that didn't really affect me, without realizing just how much it actually was. And I mean, Sophia brought up some great points about how activist burnout is real and how climate anxiety is real. And it's easy to feel the weight of all these things that pressures you. But recently, especially with the COVID crisis, I found out just how easy it was to put myself first, and how what a difference really that made. And it's so much easier than I ever would have thought, because at first I thought when it came to things like therapy or talking to a professional, these things came at a higher cost and were more inaccessible to low income communities. But I was pleasantly surprised when I reached out to an organization in my area and asked them if they would consider doing pro bono work, and they did. They do pro bono work. So I want to remind everyone that it's just because you are low income, or your POC, or your family doesn't really believe in mental health, or whatever the case might be, put yourself first, and put yourself out there. I know that's been a common topic in this session, but you'd be surprised how much you can achieve doing that. And I'm so glad that I've actually done that for myself these past few months.
Yeah, and Aparna, did you have
Yes, I'm happy to jump in. Thank you for sharing your personal story, Diana, there. And I couldn't agree more about sort of this idea of activist burnout and this sense of anxiety that can loom when thinking about the climate crisis. For me, I think, finding ways to stay grounded in hope and being action oriented are, to me, what feel most therapeutic and sort of uplifting to me. I don't think being hopeful means being anything but honest about what's really going on, but I still think, I think all advocates and activists at our heart are optimists, right? We advocate because we have hope and optimism that a better tomorrow is possible. So I think as far as like sources of hope and inspiration, youth leadership is certainly a big part of it. So I'm getting a big boost right now, being able to hear from you both. My patients are a source of hope and inspiration. I love that I have a face and a family and a relationship with people that I serve to really ground the work that I'm doing. I'm a parent. I have a 6 and 9-year-old, and my children give me a lot of hope. I think this idea of being action oriented, I actually in some ways feel more optimistic now than I ever have, because I think that this moment of urgency that we know from climate science is real, but this moment of urgency, as I said, being underscored by what we're being forced to learn about COVID and from these intersections between racial justice, and climate action. I think, like, I really do feel it's a bit of a crucible right now. Like, we have 10 years to do it. We have just crammed a ton of knowledge into this, in sometimes very painful way, into this short space of time. We have these incredible, powerful youth leaders. We have, I think, a more diverse climate movement than ever. I just feel like this sense that, like, how lucky are we to be alive right now, to be able to be part of a solution for a better tomorrow. I really believe that. And that's, for me, been, yeah, it's tiring sometimes, and I feel that anxiety too, but like remembering those sources of hope and inspiration and focusing on action, to me, feels really, really sort of uplifting and therapeutic in a really genuine way right now.
And we're just about to jump into our final lightning round question, but did get a quick, question about how about the mental health impacts of climate change on children. So Aparna, I'm just going to turn to you to answer briefly. Are you seeing mental health impacts in your patients? We could probably have a whole episode that really dives in on the research there and what we're seeing, but just any quick thoughts?
We probably could, and I will be very brief because maybe the youth on today want to make a sentence about this too. Yes, mental health impacts on children are very real, both when you think about the aftermath of climate-related disasters, one of the most lingering health impacts of those disasters are in the sort of post-traumatic mental health harms on children. We see it in their impacts on school, how they're functioning in their families, but then also this concept of eco-anxiety, of sort of looking around. Children are smart, they're tuned in, and they're thoughtful. And when they see that they're connecting the dots themselves, whether or not we know it, whether or not we're talking about it, and we should be, because I think that honesty is important, but they are drawing conclusions about the world they're going to inherit. And that does provoke anxiety. And we need to talk about it, acknowledge it, and address it.
Sophia or Diana, any thoughts before we jump into the last question?
I've just mentioned that the most important thing to do, whether you're a parent, an adult, or a teacher, a professional, anything of that sort, and you work with kids or you have kids, the most important thing to do really is to listen and to ask and to, care about their health, their mental health, really, and ask them to tell you how things like this impact them, because maybe you'd be surprised to hear their answer.
So we are approaching the end of our time together, and I have jotted down so many notes and learned so much. But I want to ask one last lightning round question before we wrap up, and that is, there will be thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that are voting in the next couple of days. What image do you want people to take with them into the voting booth or to the drop box? What is that image you want them to have in their head when they're filling out their ballot? Diana, start with you.
I have two messages for people. The first one is for any youth voters out there, anyone who might be voting for the first time in this election, or who is new to voting or to the political scene of things. I'd like you to carry the image of the future into the voting booth. And your definition of the future might be different, and it's different for everyone. I have explained what an equitable climate future looks like for me in this session, but I know your future might be one where you envision success for yourself, for your family, and well-being. And these things all have to do with issues like climate. They all have to do with issues like social justice. So I urge you to think about the future when you're voting in this election. And my second message is for any adults or older professionals or individuals who might be voting in this election or future elections. I urge you to carry into the voting booth the image of your kids, or if you don't have kids, any youth who you know and any loved ones, carry this image of them, because all these issues that we've talked about here today and so many more impact them directly. So don't only vote for yourself, but do it for the youth and do it for the ones you care about, because I promise you, we need it. We need your support.
And Aparna, go ahead.
I love this question about an image. I was thinking about, this is what I'll be thinking about when I vote. I'm going to vote in person. I am thinking about a child. I would like to envision a child, and no matter what her skin color or where she lives, she is breathing clean air. She's under a clear sky and is looking into the future with a sense of hope and security that the world before her is going to be a healthy place where she can access opportunities to thrive equal to anybody else. And, as I was about to say that, as I was listening to Diana, I had something else come into that image, which was the idea of that child being hand in hand with a senior. When we think about intergenerational impacts of climate change and what intergenerational justice means, I'm a pediatrician. I care about kids so much. But really, pediatricians are in it because we are wanting kids to have a planet where they can thrive into a healthy old age, right? And that we want every generation to be able to access a healthy, safe, sustainable, equitable planet where they can thrive. So I was thinking about that little child looking into the future, but I'm going to add an elder holding her hand.
And Sophia.
Well, I always have one image when I go into the voting booth, because this is my first general election. But when I was voting in the primaries, I remember there was this image that was circulating on social media, and I just pulled it up. And what it says is, vote as if your skin is not white, your parents need medical care, your spouse is an immigrant, your land is on fire, your child is transgender, your house is flooded, your sister is a victim of gun violence, your brother is gay, your water is unsafe, because privilege has no place in an election, but empathy does. And that really is what I always think about, because while we might be privileged and we might not be struggling with these things, there are people all over the world who really are. And so when we vote, we have to think about them.
All right, well, everybody listening, you have your marching orders. You know what to carry with you to the voting booth. And as we work together on climate solutions over the next several years, decades, so looking forward to lots of tangible actions coming out of this. Aparna, Diana, Sophia, thank you so much for the time you have spent with us today and for the tremendous work that you're all doing all the time. So just thank you so much on behalf of ecoAmerica and Climate for Health and all of our listeners. We welcome everyone to join us again next week on Thursday, November 5th for the next episode of Let's Talk Climate, What the Election Means for Climate Change, when our president and founder, Bob Perkowitz, will be in discussion with Michelle Dietrich, chair and founder of the DNC Environment and Climate Crisis Council, and Jerry Taylor, president of the Niskanen Center. Please click on the link to the survey when this webcast ends to provide your feedback. If you're watching this on YouTube, check out the description below to let us know what you think. Engage with us online with the hashtag Let's Talk Climate, and be sure to subscribe and follow us for the latest thought leadership resources and episodes on climate action and advocacy. From all of us at ecoAmerica and Climate for Health, thank you. Please join me in caring for our climate in order to care for our health. Stay well, stay safe, get out the vote, and see you next week.